What you're hearing about today, less than 0.1% will ever understand what we're talking about. We lend them the dollars so they can pay us back.
It was never intended to happen. The shadow banking evolved as a short-term solution that really got out of control. So in 2008, when the global financial crisis happened, there's actually a government testimony of Bernanke trying to answer the questions about the swap lines and the shadow banking, and he couldn't answer it. They've never done this before. So the clause that created the swap line wasn't actually an intention. And here's the craziest part of this. 15 central banks around the world. Now there's over 200 central banks, but there's 15 central banks that have been granted swap lines.
In 1913 is important because that's when the Fed was created, but it was also when the IRS was created.
That's right.
That's what people cannot see because it's below the surface. You know, like you see Bank of America on the streets, and you see like Charles Schwab on the street. But below that whole ground level is these massive lines. It's like an oil refinery underground, all these lines running everywhere. You know, there's cash flowing in this direction, cash flowing in that direction, but mom and pop never see it.
Here's the wildest point. So what this essentially happens is a swap line is a lifeline. Think of it as a line of credit, unlimited. Here's the craziest part. So think about all the media attention and nonsense everyone had to see in the news and on their social media regarding the $2 trillion stimulus between the Democrats and the Republicans and all the BS between that. We're at $500 billion already in the first month of these central banks being granted. That's foreigners. So the Americans are subsidizing the demand for US dollars in these foreign countries. So if you want to take Bank of Japan has already drawn down over $225 billion in the first month of being allowed to.
Bank of Japan, their central bank, doesn't have dollars. So the U.S. lends them the dollars so they can pay us back. Is that basically it?
And here's the scheme when you want to talk about the shadow banking or the friendly agreement. There's 7-day loans or 84-day loans, so 12 weeks. So that's kind of where it's at. And you look at the interest rates being paid, they're not getting paid back. They're just rolling these over and over and over. So they take a 7-day, they roll it over to 84 days, and they just keep compounding. Now, what is wild about this is the chair of the Fed, of the US Fed, so right now Powell, does not need to get US President Trump's approval, Congress's approval, the House's approval, nobody. It's essentially an incredible stick, but the swap line nations that have this lifeline, they have to agree to the terms and conditions. And essentially it's America saying, hey, you're our ally, we'll back you. If you're short of US dollars, we'll create a swap line, a lifeline, a line of credit, unlimited. So, but what the serious implications here are is Trump's done all this work for Boeing to subsidize because it's one of the biggest companies in America. Think about all the jobs and just the logistics of the country. So he's going to prop up the company Boeing. But at the same time, almost $200 billion has gone to the European Central Bank that then funds that. They take those US dollars because Airbus, the Boeing equivalent of Europe, which is being subsidized by the French government by access to these swap lines to compete with an American company. That's what Powell isn't thinking, where the dynamics get really crazy, where it's the American people that are funding the cannibalism of their own industry. So if Trump really wants to, make America great again, he has to close these loopholes that the Fed has unintentionally created because it was never intended that way. So if you look at countries like Mexico has a swap line, Canada has a swap line, Australia, Sweden, Norway, these are American allies. Now, do you think Russia or China are going to get swap lines? No. So the ECB has drawn down almost $200 billion and it's not being paid down. Remember, they keep rolling over. Powell just said, we digitally print it, right? That's a quote from him directly.
So the European Central Bank is out of dollars because Correct. I think 80% of the debt in the world is financed in US dollars. So when a bank like the European Central Bank runs out of dollars, our Fed extends a swap line, which means we lend them the dollars so they can pay us back.
But they're not paying it back. This is the whole point. They just keep rolling it over, right? So the debt keeps growing. But what does the European Central Bank or the Japanese banks do with these dollars? Well, it's not like the bank needs them. It's the biggest companies in Europe, such as Airbus, which is the Boeing equivalent, which has been subsidized for years. That's what the whole battle's been about. And what they do now is they take those US dollars, convert them into the euros, prop up the debt of a company like Airbus. They subsidize that manufacturing of those buses. And specifically now, when the airline industry is on life support, they're using US dollars from the US Fed to put the lifeline into the European airline industry, which is directly competing with American Boeing. That's just one example of many. Think about the impacts. Like, there's over 80 countries have already asked for swap lines. Turkey's openly begging for them, but you have to agree to the terms and conditions. This is the power. America has a big geopolitical stick, and this is in the next 5 years going to be the biggest stick that the American foreign policy can use because of the shortage of US dollars globally. So you look at what's going on in any parts where they're producing gold, silver, natural resources, and when you look at some of the places and the regimes that are in control here, things that we've talked about a month ago, today, Zambia has declared that gold is a strategic asset. Well, of course it is from a government standpoint, because it's the purest form of money, and they're going to nationalize the mines. It starts with the gold, then it'll go to the silver. And all I'm trying to educate.
Are these mines now owned by foreign corporations?
Correct. They're all owned by like big companies,
take them and nationalize them.
Exactly. And this is what I'm trying to educate people is the risk isn't priced into the market. Some of these, for example, like on my website, I put the stuff out for free just to educate people. The royalty companies are trading 3 times their NAV, so 3 times what they're worth. So pretend your house is worth $1 million. It's trading at 3 million. So already it's expensive. Gold needs to go to like $3,000 for it to be fair value, but that's fine. That's a separate point. But 65% of their revenue comes from assets that are producing from negative swap line nations, which are nations that do not have access to the US dollar.
This is the point, because it becomes a foreign policy type of thing, is if Powell or Trump says we don't like you, like Indonesia, and we don't extend a swap line to them, then the only recourse, Zambia or Indonesia or these other countries that hate us, they're going to take our gold mines. And
Indonesia is the perfect example. Let me tell you why you hit the nail on the head here. So Indonesia, there's an American company. It's probably the best copper company in the world, called Freeport. And Freeport has one of the best mines in the world in Indonesia called Grasberg. It's the largest gold and copper mine in the world. This thing is massive. Indonesia keeps changing the rules. We want more royalty. We want you to build a smelter here. We need to take a larger percentage of the mine. Then once they raped and pillaged as much as they could, they desperately needed a swap line. They agreed to the terms and conditions with the American government. Because of the geopolitical angle, the governments are smart, and Indonesia is the model that Turkey's going to follow, Argentina's going to follow. They're going to steal as much as they can, but still keep the mine alive, but the investors get screwed. And because China was expanding in the South Sea, America needed Indonesia's support there, and that's why the American Fed, the US Fed, granted Indonesia a swap line. So Indonesia became the 15th central bank to get a swap line. But you look at Argentina just recently, the environmental minister of Argentina openly has stated that these Canadian and American and Australian companies aren't taking care of the water and environment to the standard that they would. But hold on, these companies are the best in the world at the environmental standard. Now, mining is difficult. There's no doubt about it. I'm not trying to paint it in a beautiful brush. It's a tough industry, but that's a form of, he's hinting nationalization. You think an Argentinian national company, what happens when you look at nationalization, Venezuela, Mexico did this. Mexico nationalized the oil fields on the Americans in the 1920s in the revolution there. And what happens is they take the profits from these resources. They fund their social agenda. And mining is tough, and energy development. You have to reinvest in the projects. And the fundamental theme here is the shareholders who are exposed to companies that have assets and negative swap lines are going to get screwed. And number two, the output level of these assets are going to decrease because the government officials, that's what they are. They're government officials. They're not entrepreneurs. They're not true developers of these assets. They're not reinvesting into these assets to keep the production up. So the production goes down. So ultimately, this is the biggest bullish case for gold that nobody's talking about, because the local governments in these negative swap line nations are going to essentially steal these assets from the foreign-owned companies. These foreign countries are going to use the tagline that investors in the West are forcing these companies to live by, which is ESG. Environmental, social governance, right? First of all, who gives a social license? It's an infinite loop of questions. You can't get a social license. It's a never-ending process. But this ESG concept is going to be the secret weapon that these local countries, these negative swap line nations, are going to use to nationalize. And China, like you pointed, like a lot of people don't realize, China is the world's largest producer of gold, and 0 ounces get sold into the international markets. It all gets sold in China. So when you look at Russia, a major producer of gold, none of it gets sold. They're a net buyer of gold, of also other people's gold. Then you look at someone like Canada, we are a major gold producer. We're a top 8 gold producer in the world, and we own 0 gold. Our central bank has sold all the gold. Like, we literally have no gold.
This is that whole point on this whole thing, is that the swap line is the money system. And if we like you, we give you a swap line. If we don't like you, you don't get a swap line. And the reason to say gold is God's money, but the devil distributed it, gold is found in some of the most inhospitable people who hate America the most countries, which is why the price of gold should go up. But there's one more thing that people do not realize, is that if you own, everybody right now is running into gold mining shares, but if the gold mining company is in one of these countries with no swap line and hate America, what's going to happen to the price of the mining company shares?
So you look at the access of swap lines. So this is developing into a G2 world. So it's America and its allies. And you can already see who its allies are, because who got swap lines, right? There's 15 central banks that have it. And then the rest of the world is the battleground now. So China and Russia are really trying to work with developing a alternative to the US dollar swap line, lifeline. And to do that, the Chinese are preventing the flow of capital out of China. Look at Vancouver real estate as a perfect example. To do that, the domestic Chinese money, the underground shadow route to get the money out of China was Hong Kong. And that is precisely one of the main reasons that our media isn't talking about why China's going after Hong Kong, if you look at what's going on right now. And that's essentially how they're going to nationalize it.
Guys like Jim Rickards are calling for, gold to go 5,000, 10,000, and I hear all the things. But what you're saying now, with the swap lines being cut and other countries hate us and they're inefficient, do you have any forecasts on the price of gold and silver in the future?
When 1933, the first major executive order that President Roosevelt made on April 5th was, you have to surrender the gold at $20.67. The international rate at the time was about $29 US dollar equivalent in Europe. But the American government, whether you had a safety deposit box or anything, they seized everything and they opened up the box and said, you got gold, you got to sell it now at $20.67. Then on January 30th, the US Gold Reserve Act came out, and that's when he repriced the gold to $35 an ounce. And it was a 69% increase like that, and he needed to bring inflation. The only thing I'm trying to warn everyone who does own bullion, and you need to own bullion, first of all, don't tell your friends about it, don't flaunt it, don't show it off, but be very careful where you store it, because another thing, I think another step that these negative swap line nations are going to do is take a page out of Roosevelt's book and force people, and remember, they how America did it, they actually made these guys testify. They went to the gold miners and the bullion dealers and said, show me who you sold all your gold to. And then they went to those people and said, you have to sell it to us. That's what's going to happen to places in negative swap line nations, because gold is pure money and it's the quickest way to get access to US dollars. And if they do that in a local currency in Turkey, if you produce gold, you can't just sell it to a smelter outside of Turkey. You got to sell it to the fixed rate to the government in their local currency. Then you get dinged on the tax and it's a lower rate. Then you got to convert it to US dollars. You get dinged at that at the government rate, just like in Argentina. So the governments are going to clip and cut from each angle. So I believe in being a bullionaire. I believe in owning bullion, but I think before gold has its massive, incredible run, and I think Rickards is right, it's going to hit that $5,000 price. We're going to see a lot of volatility. I think that 5 years is the time frame to get to 5,000, but you're going to see a lot of nations call it a strategic asset and do exactly what America did in 1933 and force its citizens to surrender or nationalize their gold at the fixed rate in their local currency, then reprice it at the higher price. So you want to be able to hold it and survive to get to that 5-year time frame.